for a second, waking up completely alone. You're covered in thick mud, your clothes are completely torn, and all around you is nothing but the deafening, wild sounds of Amazon rainforest. You're 17 years old, and your last memory is being strapped into a seat on a commercial airplane right as it ripped apart in the sky. Well, this is the terrifying, absolutely true reality of Juliana Kopke, and in today's Explainer, we are going to break down exactly how she survived.
It really begs a massive, honestly seemingly impossible question, right? How does a teenager survive a 10,000-foot free fall from the sky? We are dropping right into the middle of the action here, Christmas morning, 1971. Time when most families were, opening presents, but Julianne was opening her eyes to a literal living nightmare, having just survived an event with a 0% statistical survival rate. So, after lying unconscious through a night of torrential rain, she tried to stand up, blacking out repeatedly. When she finally managed to stay conscious, she kind of took stock of her injuries. A broken collarbone, a severely sprained knee, deep cuts on her right shoulder and her left calf. One of her eyes was swollen completely shut, and through the other, she could only see through a tiny... Oh, and she had lost her glasses, meaning her already terrible vision was severely compromised. Plus, she was missing a sandal and dealing with a heavy concussion.
Part 1. Disaster in the sky. Flashback to Lanza Flight 508. Let's rewind for a second. It's Christmas Eve 1971. Julianne and her mother, Maria, were rushing to get from Lima to Pucallpapa to celebrate Christmas with Julianne's father at their jungle research station. They had delayed their trip to high school graduation and prom. But because of the holiday rush, every single reliable airline was totally sold out. They had literally one option left: Lanza Airlines. Now, Julianne's father had actually warned them against Lanza. They had a terrible safety record. In fact, in Spanish, locals joked that Lanza meant lands on its belly, and they had already suffered multiple fatal crashes. To make matters worse, the plane was a Lockheed L-188 Electra. This model was built for flying over flat deserts, not navigating the severe, volatile weather of the Andes Mountains. Its wings were notoriously stiff, making it incredibly vulnerable to heavy turbulence. This plane had actually already been retired in the US, but the 86 passengers on board, they didn't know that.
So, let's trace exactly what went wrong. The first 30 minutes? Completely normal. They even served breakfast. But as they began their descent, this massive, pitch-black storm appeared. Instead of flying around it, the pilots flew straight into it. The plane was hit so violent that luggage actually flew out of the overhead bins right onto the terrified passengers. This total nightmare lasted for 20 agonizing minutes. Then, at 21,000 feet, lightning struck the right wing. Because of the plane's rigid design, the wing caught fire and just snapped off. The left wing quickly followed. Plunging to 10,000 feet, just 15 minutes away from their destination, the aircraft completely disintegrated in midair. Julianne, sitting in window seat 19F, in the second-to-last row, was still strapped in as her row of 3 seats broke away from the tumbling wreckage.
Part 2. The physics of a miracle. Surviving the unsurvivable.
10,000 feet. Just think about that number for a second. 2 miles, straight out of the sky, without a parachute, strapped to a tumbling chunk of metal. Ground radar, and after days of searching the dense Amazon, rescue teams completely gave up, assuming a 100% fatality rate. So, how on earth was she breathing on Christmas morning? It turns out 3 distinct, almost unbelievable environmental phenomena just perfectly aligned to save her life. First, storm updrafts. That severe storm had incredibly powerful upward winds pushing from the ground up, which actively slowed her free fall. Second, the helicopter effect. The row of 3 seats she was strapped to began spinning rapidly in the air, acting almost exactly like the blades of a helicopter to create drag and reduce her terminal velocity. And third, the Amazon canopy itself. The incredibly dense leaves and thick vines intertwined to act as this massive organic trampoline, breaking her final impact right before she hit the ground. It was a flawless, miraculous combination of physics and nature.
Part 3. The 11-day ordeal. Following the water.
Now, Julianne actually possessed one incredible advantage. She wasn't just some city kid. Her parents were zoologists who ran the Panguana research station, so she had spent 3 years living in the deep jungle. She remembered a golden rule her father had taught her: follow the water. A stream becomes a river, and a river leads to people. This one singular piece of advice, absolute survival mantra.
She applied this deep jungle knowledge instantly with calculating precision. She knew crying out for a mom wouldn't help, and she quickly realized rescue helicopters simply couldn't see through that thick canopy. Finding a single packet of 30 candies from the wreckage, she strictly rationed them out. She knew the dense forest floor didn't offer much edible fruit, and when she found mushrooms, actively avoided them, knowing they were likely poisonous. To stay hydrated, she licked water droplets right off the leaves. She even knew to steer clear of massive, terrifying predators like the Goliath bird-eater spider. Yeah, a spider big enough to eat birds. No thank you.
But by day 4, her mental fortitude was put to the ultimate test. Hearing the vultures, birds that feed on carrion, she followed the sound and stumbled upon a truly horrifying scene. It was a row of seats from the plane. The impact had been so severe that the 3 passengers strapped to them were buried 3 feet headfirst into the solid ground. Terrified it might be her mother, she carefully poked the feet with a stick. Seeing nail polish brought this huge wave of heartbreaking relief because her mother never wore nail polish. But it was a grim, inescapable reminder of the realities she was trapped in.
As the days kind of blurred together, the physical toll became agonizing. On day 6, she heard a hoatzin bird. Her dad had taught her that these birds only nest near large water. This gave her a massive burst of hope, and she actually found a larger river. But by day 8, the severe sunburn on her back was causing her skin to painfully peel away, bleeding. Her candies were completely gone. To save her rapidly fading energy, by day 9, she began swimming down the river instead of walking. Thanks to her zoology background, she knew female alligators were much less likely to attack someone floating in deep water compared to walking on the banks. But by day 10, cold, starving, and hallucinating, she was pushed to the absolute brink of human endurance.
Part 4. Rescue. The 30 maggots. On the evening of the 10th day, as she was literally dragging herself onto the riverbank, she saw a boat. Her mind was so incredibly fragile at this point that she thought it was a hallucination. She actually rubbed her eyes 3 separate times before she believed it was real. Dragging her battered, exhausted body up a small path right next to the boat, she found a small, empty shelter. But inside that shelter, she had to confront a horrifying medical emergency. Remember that deep cut on her arm? Well, jungle flies had laid eggs in it, and she realized, to her absolute horror, that she had 30 maggots eating deep into her living flesh. Without immediate treatment, she was going to lose even her life to infection. Recalling how her father had once treated a maggot-infested wound on their dog, she found a tube of petrol, gasoline, sitting right there in the hut. In a display of just unimaginable toughness, she poured the burning fuel directly into her open flesh. The intensely stinging petrol forced the maggots to retreat up to the surface to breathe, and one by one, Julianne pulled all 30 of them out of her own arm. She then basically collapsed, deciding she would just wait there for whoever owned that boat. The very next evening, 3 local lumberjacks emerged from the jungle to find her. Seeing a pale, bloodied girl with wildly bloodshot eyes and torn clothes, their first instinct was pure terror. You see, in local Amazonian folklore, there's a myth of a powerful water goddess, and these guys genuinely thought they had encountered a demon. Gathering her absolute last ounce of strength, Julianne spoke to them in Spanish, explaining exactly who she was and that she had survived the Lanza plane crash. Completely astonished, the men fed her, cleaned her wounds, and the very next day transported her by boat to safety, where she was finally airlifted to a hospital.
Part 5. The ultimate lesson. The tragic truth of Flight 508.
When search teams, guided by Juliana's incredible return, located the wreckage, they discovered a truly heartbreaking truth. 14 other passengers had actually survived the initial crash alongside Juliana.
But tragically, those 14 survivors stayed put. They waited at the crash site for a rescue team that, because of that dense jungle canopy, simply could not see them and eventually called off the search. Every single one of them ultimately perished. You see, Julianne survived not just because she lived through the fall, but because she took immediate, decisive action. She relied on her knowledge, she adapted to her brutal environment, and most importantly, she followed the water. She eventually learned that her mother hadn't survived, a grief she... But Julianne didn't let the jungle defeat her. Today, at 71 years old, she's a highly renowned biologist. In 2000, she actually took over her parents' penguino research station in the Amazon. She took the very jungle that claimed her mother and nearly took her own life, and she dedicated her existence to studying and fiercely protecting it.
Which leads us with this final thought for today's explainer. Julianne Kopke felt 2 miles out of the sky and walked out of the deadliest jungle on Earth because she absolutely refused to be passive. So I have to ask you, when faced with the impossible situations in your own life, will you wait around for a rescue that may never come?